a band. You hear it?
It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Occult Rejects. Thank you very much for tuning into this show. If this is the first time you ever come across this show, thank you very much for hitting that play button and checking this out. If you are a returning listener, that's what's up. I appreciate you all. And if you like this episode, like I'm sure you liked the last two, at the end, make sure you share it and pass it on. As you can see, this is part 3 to our first series coming back after our little break. I love the series so far. Robby, thank you so much for coming on and doing it. It's always a plethora of knowledge having you on, and it's just, I always learn, you know. So this was a great experience. I couldn't have been prouder to have you on and doing the series with me. And I'm also very happy to have had Teresa on the whole time with me, co-hosting this series. Thank you very much as well. I appreciate that.
Thank
Teresa.
you. It's been a lot of fun. I always love talking with Robby. It's like I said to you yesterday, it's mythological story time with Robby Marx.
She did. She said that yesterday. I was like, "Oh, that's totally right."
Yeah.
And do you real quick? You want to plug your show that you also have as well?
Sure. Yeah. So we have another show together called the Spiritual Gangsters podcast, which is a lot of fun. It's more conversational, just like free flowing, and talk with cool guests who've been through some shit usually, or have an interesting story to tell. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. We have to get Robby on there soon.
Yes, we do. Yeah, it'll be the next one we'll book after this.
For sure.
Oh, and real quick, not to skip Robby, I'll come back and have you plug your show. I've been meaning to mention this in the last 2 episodes, and I have been I've been forgetting, unfortunately. But the ending music at the end of our Occult Rejects now, that is that the links for that is in the bottom as well. That is a listener/fan who makes their who makes their own music. They have a band and they have stuff, and they offered to let us use the music at the end of the show. Sorry, man, I'm making noises now too. They offered to let us use their music in our shows, and I like it. I like the style of music, so I was like, hell yeah! And the links for their stuff is in the bottom. I highly suggest to go check it out. It's not your normal everyday music, but I think it's very interesting, and I dig it. So I can't thank them more. Thank you very much. That's the song that's at the end of every episode. Check out their link. So yeah, I got that out of the way. I've been forgetting to plug that. And now we have Robby. Back to Robby. Robby, would you like to let everybody know, in case they don't know who you are, where your stuff is, what you do, and what you're about?
Sure. I'm Robby Marx. I'm an artist. I've been doing art for about 35 years professionally. I say a lot.
Oh, we all have our things.
Yeah, I have my podcast called the Meta Mindcast, which is basically a series of interviews I've been doing with people like yourself, as well as some of my personal recordings that I'm putting out. And I'm on all the major podcast services. It's the Meta, METTA, Mindcast, all one word. And then I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, all the major platforms. You can just Google RMarxArt, and I should pop up.
Yep, I got all your links in the bottom. So thank you very much, Robby. And today, like you had mentioned to me before, we should be covering Thoth, Tahuti, however you people like to call it, and the mysteries of Isis and Osiris. I'm extremely happy for this one because Thoth was my boy back in the day. I worked with him or thought I was or whatever. You know, I said I was. I was working with him a lot. Very interesting character. Very diverse deity. It can go from the most minute thing to the most deepest aspect with Thoth, I think, as well, which is kind of why I liked him. So this is very interesting for me to see what you have come across, Robby.
Thoth, Tahuti. There's a variety of ways that different people pronounce his name. I've always I've always said Thoth. But when we get into Thoth, he's basically a god without a mother. He was self-created. He was born from the lips of Ra at the beginning of time, essentially at the beginning of all time space. And he became the ibis, like the cosmic bird, the ibis. And he was the one that laid the cosmic egg, which hatched all of creation. So he's a pretty big character. And in Egypt, Thoth was seen in the eyes of the Egyptians and the ancient alchemists as relating to the sacred geometric expression of the tetragrammaton. So, and for those not familiar with the tetragrammaton, basically you have two triangles in the tetragrammaton. One triangle is pointed upwards like a pyramid, and that is representative of the fire. And it is also the spoken prayer of the sorcerer, essentially, right? The second part, or the downward-facing triangle, is represented by water. And the magi would listen and reflect in the water to catch glimpses of the divine, as far as almost like using it for like a scrying type of device, right? And thirdly, what you would do is you would take these two triangles and you would merge them one on top of the other, and you basically get that six-pointed star that we see as the Hebrew star. And that is the alchemical wedding, or the marriage, which is the creation. When you mix the fire and the water, essentially that creates this like moving steam that is essentially the air force, the force of the air. And this is where essentially the idea of God and human becoming as one in this kind of turning etheric, steamy kind of atmosphere, right?
Would you consider that like the middle pillar on the Kabbalah tree of life?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, because the left pillar would be the downward facing, the female personification, whereas the right pillar would be the upward, male personification. And then the center, well, and that's all the time, man. No matter what you're looking at, the magic happens in the center, in the space between. It's always in this etheric space between the two opposing forces. And much like we're going to talk about getting into Hermes, which Thoth kind of transmute. Once you have the Persian thought influence coming in, you get the rise of Hermes out of Thoth, and you get this mix of Thoth, Hermes, and Mercury being Hermes Trismegistus, but yeah.
Even when you were mentioning, like, I guess you're kind of giving the idea of like swirling smoke or steam or whatever.
Right.
Even like the numbers, and I know I've mentioned this before, and I really do think they are showing something. Even in the middle pillar, you have Kether, and then you have the sun, and then you have the moon. The sun's number is 6, which is, and then the moon's number is 9, which is the opposite of a swirling shape. I know, as crazy as that sounds, but maybe the 6 is going up.
Yeah. And also when you get into energetic forces, when things move to the right, that's generally represented as the male force. So when you're looking at like these different swastikas, and a lot of times you'll see them overlay two swastikas on top of one another, and that's basically the generative force. But the right turning, anything that's right turning, like the clock, like that we use on the wall now, that's a male kind of energy because it's moving to the right. Whereas if something's moving to the left, that's the divine female personification.
I even wonder if that has anything to do with DSL and Widdershins. To tell you the
Anything
truth.
to do with what?
DSL and Widdershins, depending on which way you're doing your circle. If you're doing a circle, you'll either be going clockwise or counterclockwise.
Right.
Some people, no matter what, if you're using like the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram and the hexagram in certain rituals, they just go in one way. I have questioned, can you do it the other way? I do think that's possible too. But when it comes to witchcraft, depending if you're invoking or banishing, you will go in different directions. I wonder if that relates back to any of that as well. You know?
Right. Well, in ancient Baal worship, when they would do the circumambulation of the mountain, they would actually follow the path, and to the center would be to your left the whole time. And then they would sacrifice, in the high places. The whole left-right thing. And the left-hand path and the right-hand path, and the left-hand pillar, the right-hand pillar. It's it's a consummate thing when you're looking at these ideas of magical thinking and polarity.
And you even mentioned this, I forgot how you say that word.
Circumambulation.
Yeah, there's even in like one of Crowley's rituals, it's not the Star Ruby, damn it, it's his other one that's actually pretty elaborate. I have to give him credit with that one. I forgot the name of it. Maybe it's the Reguli, where you do, like, depending on like what you're invoking. Let's say I was invoking Netzach. If I was doing the seventh sphere, I would do 7 of those things around my circle and act like I'm doing the sign of the Emperor. Every time I make a thing. So, like, you're even spinning around your magic circle yourself, too, in a sense.
Yeah, that show that I keep talking about, The Gift, so we talked about before we started recording, that's the main symbol in the show is a spiral going one way, a spiral going another way. They meet in the middle with a diamond, and then there's one little dot in the center. And that's, like, the theme throughout the whole thing, and it's alchemical and male-female merging and all that,
Well, and when you take a square and you cant it on its corner, that's essentially implying a type of magical. And then I don't know, the diamond with the dot in the center sounds very reminiscent of the circle with the dot.
The sun, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. So,
for sure.
Which would still make sense because the sun would be in the middle of the tree as well. So that is beauty and balance.
Oh yeah.
I even think like sometimes when people put up that symbol or the diamond, there's still I think there is a difference between those, but I do think there's a correlation between them in a sense.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh no, not at all. Now with Thoth, he was originally a lunar or a moon god, measuring the night winds, and gave great attention to astronomy. The cycles of astral bodies. He was the measure of the turning of the heavens, and he was the head of the sacred wisdom. As the high magician, he was counselor to Lord Ra himself, and with Ma'at, the three took the nightly voyage of the lunar boat across the night sky.
He was also kind of considered like a magician as well, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, didn't he write the spell that Isis used to put Osiris back together?
Yes. And, a lot of what Thoth would do, you would oftentimes see him doing the silent symbol of Harpocrates. So when we get into the ideas of these mysteries, a lot of it was the idea that it was secret. And that you were meant to listen and not necessarily, it was the idea of taking in the information and not necessarily, partaking in it. It was like the learning of ascension, and that was with all the mystery schools. You had the idea that, you would have to spend like a certain amount of time in quietude in order to, listen to the elect, so that you would learn to understand the language and the secrets. And so, a lot of times when people would ask Thoth, a question, he would just put his finger to his lips, rather than answering the question, So it's like, well, if you listened and you took in enough, information, you might see the turning of what the pattern is, So he was like all about this kind of unseen, kind of hidden kind of turning of the night winds, Yeah.
I want to ask your opinion on something, Robby, because you mentioned RMarxArt, or however you say that damn name.
Hippocrates?
Well, no, it's like the sign of silence.
Yeah.
You do that. I mean, any ritual I think I've actually done, tell you the truth, after you're done doing whatever you're doing in that area and you're done doing it, you make that sign. And Crowley normally would associate that with there's like 3 versions of Horus, I think, that he has. Ra Hor Kuwait, or Prakrata, however you say his name, and then like another one or whatever. Different versions of Horus. But I do also think, and this is what I wanted to ask you, do you think it's possible that Horus and Thoth are the same aspect, just in a different timeline or a different
timeline? Yeah, and that is interesting.
Because like when you look at the birds, you have one that is known for being very solitude in the sky by itself, high up. Right. And then you have one that's very low to the earth, but yet it's tall and can put its mouth down. It's just...
Well, and the ibis is more related to being earthbound and putting it, like we talked about,
letting its beak into the waters every once in a while.
Well, and also into the crocodile eggs.
That's right.
And so the set was representing the crocodile, the waterfish, but nonetheless, Thoth being the ibis, that when the ibis go along the water's edge, they would be looking for the crocodile's nest, essentially just to drain the eggs, So Thoth, in accordance with the aspects of nature, is, diametrically opposed to the natural aspects of Set, being the crocodile. So there's this, but yeah, it is interesting to think, with Thoth, he is constantly, he was there in the beginning, just like, the foundational gods coming down. He was there for the creation of time. There's even some information in regard to Thoth basically guiding the moon into its orbit, as far as, setting the stage for the aspects of generative life to form on Earth with the tides and the moving of the waters, and and Thoth actually went out. What was it? Amun, when Amun lost one of his eyes at one point, he lost his left eye, which is symbolic of Isis and the moon, right? But he went out and actually had to coerce the eye into returning back to Amun. But then you have Horus at the same time, who has his eyes symbolically being the sun and the moon, just like Amun. So you start to see this again, this hopscotching, where these gods take on the same characteristics, and I think it's a lot to do with the evolution of the peoples in the night sky, and a lot of the just the turning of the thought,
the thought with Thoth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that you said about him before, how I kind of look at Thoth is more of like maybe the programs or the programming or the operating system that the Matrix runs on. And like on the bottom of the tree, I just feel like if you even look at what's associated with Hod, that's almost like the filing system, the operating system, and then like the other sphere, the green one, Netzach, to me is like the green screen and the visual that you get from it, Yeah. But because when you get into that side of the tree, the left side, and that sphere, that is very much like names and labels and stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's like now everything's being categorized. This is this, that's that.
Well, and as it comes down, the complexity of the fractaline, like crystalline matter, becomes more scattered. it becomes more crystallized, but it becomes more scattered. Whereas as you move like the pyramid, essentially, as you move to the top, things become more refined into that pure, point at the top, which is
It's like having a big chunk of salt and just cracking little slivers off of it and the sprinkles.
Yeah. So now Thoth was credited with writing, and it was he who brought the use of the hieroglyphic system into use in ancient times. And Thoth was the scribe of the underworld, and he was represented as the symbol of the scribe being, we talked about the ibis. And that ibis, essentially the beak of the ibis, they looked at as like the writing nib. And as far as also a sliver of the moon, because when you would see the sliver of the moon, you would have that dark portion of the moon, and Thoth was represented as the dark side of the moon, or the hidden wisdom within the moon itself,
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I got a tiny little note. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So also the ibis, when it has its head tucked under its wing, it resembles a human heart. So they have some link to Thoth being related to the heart itself. Yeah.
Interesting.
So let's see. Thoth, Tahuti, Thoth. He was also seen as the dog-headed ape, or he traveled with the dog. Okay, so this is something that I recently was really looking into, and essentially you have within alchemy, you have the idea of mercury and silver, and they kind of follow one another within the alchemical process, right? And then we also have within the heavens, you have essentially, let's see, what was it? You have silver being the moon, right? And Thoth or Mercury being the planet Mercury, essentially, right? And they say that silver follows Mercury within the heavens and within the alchemical process, within all these different levels of these symbolic systems, right? And silver was, it's pronounced cynocephalos, and that's basically the dog-headed ape, which is where you see this baboon character, right? And it will be holding the crescent moon on top of its head, right? And a lot of people say that Thoth is represented by the baboon, but it's more the baboon is this cynocephalus, who is the disciple almost of Thoth, or it's like the disciple and the master, right? So you essentially have the silver, which is the cynocephalus, and then you have Mercury, which is Thoth. And so as they follow each other through the sky, or as they follow each other in alchemy, it's basically symbolic of the master and the disciple or the initiate. So it's this idea of the initiate being, brought into the ideas of Mercury. And we also see Mercury and the moon both in day and night. So it's kind of, it's just symbolically, it's interesting how the character of Thoth ties in with all that in regard to zodiacal and alchemical and,
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I think, and I've mentioned this before, and it's something I really do want to try to tackle at some point with going over like the metals and stuff on the Tree of Life. Even when you start looking at it going up or going down, on the bottom you have whatever you have Malkuth, then you have, which is Earth, and then you have Yesod, which is the moon, and then you go to the left and you have Hod, which is Mercury. You have Mercury there. For the moon, you have silver. To the right, then for Venus and Netzach, you have copper. Copper and silver are both conduct electricity.
Right.
If you look there, you go from silver. Then if you go up, to your left, you're going from something that looks like silver, but now it's fucking a fluid.
It's a fluid.
And it rises when you apply heat to it.
Right.
You know, so it's like I think you can even see, just with the metals and stuff and the shapes that it takes place, you can see a transmutation in a sense.
Oh, yeah.
Going along on the tree. So I think that's...
And it's also interesting just how much all these systems are interrelated. And you can almost overlay them like transparencies on one another, you know?
Definitely. When you said the ape-like appearance, Robbie, it reminded me of Hanuman in the Hindu pantheon. He's a monkey-faced god.
Okay. Yeah.
And is also the god of wisdom, strength, courage, devotion, and discipline.
Very much like Thoth.
Yeah, well, very much. That's like, sounds like a whole lot of left pillar in general.
Yeah.
Which is where Thoth would fall, unfortunately, on the left pillar.
Right. Yeah.
Right? No, I never made that connection.
Or the moon,
before.
which is like a balance, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. And Thoth is often called dog-faced.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And he carries a nimbus or a crux unsada, which is the key of eternal life. And we also see Thoth in the incarnations of Hermes and Mercury, holding the staff with the serpents, being the Caduceus. He was the wise counselor of gods. When we get into Hermes, you also see they would set up what they would call the Herm, or these Hermes pillars, these pillars of Hermes. And this was kind of a later practice, but basically and they were square at their base, right? And then the square pillar would rise up and it would have a likeness of Hermes' head. And a lot of times you would see a phallus coming out of the stone. And in ritual practice, it gets into some sex magic going on with those things when you start looking into that, but let's see. So now when we get into the hieroglyphs, right, that Thoth is said to have brought into Egypt, we're looking at the beginning of hieroglyphs in Egypt about 3200 BC was when they came into more common use as far as the beginning of the writing process. Let's see. Now in the Pista Sophia, it is Thoth who is the head of the chief 7 archonic forces, and he is the Lord, who are the lords of the zodiac. And under another name, Sut or Setwed, expresses his 7-fold nature. And this relates to the 7 stars of the constellation of Ursa Major, which later on became, so you have to think that Mother Bear, or that the scythe of the Druids, the stars that make the swastika in the 4 seasons of the heavens, essentially, right, was initially related with Thoth. And then when you had the rise of Set, that became the thigh of Set, spinning in the sky at one point. Oh, wow. So you constantly see the evolution, depending on the culture, of this Big Dipper, basically, as it spins in the night sky through the 4 seasons, giving us the 4 directions or the 4 winds,
I've never heard that before. That's interesting.
So it was about, let's see, where are we at here? So as Sut, as the star Sothis, the watching dog who announced the coming inundation of the waters of the Niles in ancient times. He was essentially like the ancient Zadoks, who were the bringers of water, and basically, called out to announce the coming of the refreshing, rains that would bring the flood, to bring that black silt that we talked about, was the initial alchemical function of the ability to propagate and grow crops. So Thoth was represented as Sut or Sothos, being that watchdog that would announce the coming of the Nile flooding. And
do you ever wonder if the Nile flooding? I mean, sometimes I think the Nile has something to do with just your brain anyway. But the watchdog and the Nile flooding, like if you start looking at it, like questioning, like if the Nile and if there's actually stuff going on inside your head with that whole story. And then the whole dog barking with the Abramelin ritual, or supposedly dogs and hounds barking before you like across the abyss and all that shit.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, is there just like a play on, I don't know, a play on something there?
The turning of the stars. I would think,
I really don't think it's like literally a dog. Like people are hearing a dog bark. I think it's something else being said.
Yeah, it well, and when you get into the dog or the dog star being Sirius, which is Merca to the Masons, right? It is interesting when you follow that whole dog star, and then when the dog star would rise in the mysteries of Isis, and it's basically in the heavens a certain amount of time before it goes back into the underworld, right? But during the time when it was at its peak, that's where we get the term the dog days of summer, is when Sirius is at its highest apex during yeah
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's bugged out.
Right.
Dog Day Afternoon. Did you ever see that?
I did. I can't remember what it's about, but I've seen it. And then isn't there a
bank robbery?
Yeah, isn't there a Beatles album something to do with, or a Beatles song? Dog Day.
Hard Day's Night.
Hard Day's Night.
There's Reservoir Dogs.
Reservoir Dogs. Yeah.
It's a whole other movie.
Yeah.
Right. So now, when we get into the ancient Persian history, right? There's a character, Ibn Noah Bakht, who wrote this text, which is now lost, called the Kitab an Nemet. And only surviving fragments of this text tell us that in the ancient Iranian history, during the reign of Dahak Son K, a demonic tyrant on earth whose reign lasted more than 1,000 years in the second millennium of the world, gathered into 12 cities corresponding to the 12 signs of the zodiac, scholars that ruled over the people. And the people obeyed until a prophet came. And upon hearing the prophet, rejected the scholars, who then went off into different countries where they became kings. And it was Hermes who left Babylon and then came into Egypt and became king of Egypt. Now, this is Persian mythology that this is coming out of, right?
Really?
Yeah. So, and when you get into the idea of Hermes, there's a couple books you can check out in regard to the origin of the idea of who Hermes was. And it basically traces back into a couple of these obscure Persian texts and kind of evolved into the Hermes that we know now, with the handbags.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Fuck, Hermes. Oh,
right.
The handbags.
What's the logo?
Of the Hermes?
Of
the Hermes?
Hermes.
I think it's the word.
Let me looking it up real quick. Of course, my internet likes to be slow.
But we do see all the ancient Persian, miscellaneous wall reliefs with the different, in Sumar and Akkad, and they have the their little baskets
Bags,
or their bags or their purses.
Yeah.
The little handbag.
The logo is like a horse and carriage.
A horse and carriage, huh?
I thought that it was keys. I don't know why I thought that it was keys.
I would think it would be keys.
Yeah, who knows? I'm sure
Maybe there's more than one.
I think so.
Yeah, the horse and the carriage and the idea of pulling, the thought form kind of gets into like, what was it? The Templars, how they have the horse with two riders. It's the horse and the riders and the things that horses, and that all goes back to wasn't it Poseidon, who was essentially the one who brought horses in. So we're linking back into the underworld a little bit there, you know.
Yeah.
So now Hermes being one of these sages, and in Egypt he taught them the sacred sciences. And it was written, Hermes was the most perfect in intellect, the most accurate in knowledge, and the most subtle in investigation. And in Egypt, it was said that he ruled as a civilizing king, improving its conditions and revealing knowledge.
When you were looking into stuff, I know this is coming off like into a different pantheon, but I wanted to ask you before I forget. I don't know if you're going to go into it. Did you ever come across like Israfel and Thoth like being very much the same, just a different pantheon?
Yeah.
Because Crowley has an invocation of Israfel.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people like understand. Like, that's not even. It's like a totally different. It's an invocation to invoke Thoth, but you're actually using a different name from a different pantheon for it.
Right. Well, and then you get into the whole 777 and correspondences, and I could go grab it. I'd have to look for it, but I bet you if you go in there and you look at 777 and the correspondences with Thoth or Tahuti, it might line up.
Yeah, I used to have it next to me. I have a different book I'm working out of now.
Yeah. It's getting to the point I'm gonna have to build some bookshelves because all my books are like double stacked and like can't tell what.
Oh, I got old ones like all over the place. I probably don't even remember I still kept or have.
Right. So let's see. Now it was this Hermes also who is said to have left the sacred 13 points in the transformations of alchemy. And in statuary or stone carvings, we see Hermes with one hand pointing above and one hand pointing below, much like the later personifications of Baphomet to the Templars, as we see in Weiss Levi's drawing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, also using the symbol of the caduceus, the wand. I was
going to mention that. All right, cool.
What's that?
I was going to bring that up and ask you about that, but that's awesome that you're getting into it now.
Yeah. The symbol of the caduceus. Basically, you have these two serpents, which have been compared to Behemoth and Leviathan. And it's this idea, again, the serpents wrapping the pillar. It's in between the entwinement of these serpents where this energetic, magical force precipitates. So again, we have essentially the two pillars, or these two serpents, Mammoth, Behemoth, Leviathan and Behemoth, and it's in that center point at which the magic of Mercury or the magic of Hermes precipitates, much like the metal Mercury itself in the alchemical function.
I was going to say, it's like the Kundalini rising, and then it's like Mercury rising.
Yeah, Mercury rising, add a little fire to it, a little spark, and it'll start to burn.
Yeah.
So now it was also from Hermes, where later we get the union of Aphrodite. So we have Hermes comes together with Aphrodite, and that gives us the sacred hermaphrodite, having to do with the 13 stages of death and rebirth in alchemy, essentially. But the hermaphrodite, the creation, and when you get into the hermaphrodite, this echoes back into the foundations of creation before the sexes were split. I think in a lot of the ancient priestess cults, like you would have this within the Kybel cults, they would have the frenzied castrations because they were actually hearkening back to the androgyne, where you were neither one sex nor the other. So you have this idea of when the sexes were split. There's even actually some mention of beings that were half male and half female in the beginning times, before the sexes were fully brought into being, but nonetheless, Hermes and Aphrodite, they bring back this sacred hermaphrodite, which I think in a lot
Just
of
put their names together, right?
Yeah,
I never thought of that before.
Yeah. Herm, Aphrodite, Nonetheless, I think in a lot of these ancient mystery schools that the high priest or the high priestess either was castrated or was an actual hermaphrodite.
Well, even with that, again, going back to the sphere of Hod, the symbol of a hermaphrodite goes there.
Right.
That's where Thoth and Mercury and Hermes goes. So yeah. So that's interesting that you bring that up, because I never even once had thought about that. Hermes and hermaphrodite.
Yeah. And it isn't because, and then again you have Thoth, being Hermes. It's interesting also just how many personifications he takes on within the roles of all these different actions and forms, and yeah.
Well, I think even coming down the tree, I mean, that sphere, or that idea or that god over in that area is about actually creating sex, I think. That's when it starts to distinguish between male and female. That's when you make all these categories, and that would just fall under it. I think that's just my opinion.
Yeah. And then, and that gets back to the, naming all the animals and separating all the species, and the vision of all the, So now Thoth or Tahuti, within the idea of the Kadash, and we talked about this before, they were essentially the spiritual elders or the elect, right? And Thoth was the highest of the Kadash. Within the Eastern Kadash, who were the Magi, he was the head of the Magi, or which becomes where the magician essentially comes from, right? And then within the Western Kadash, which he was the head of the Druids. So, he's basically ruling over, within the East, he's ruling over the Magi, and within the West, he's ruling over the Druid. And we kind of see this philosophy spreading, and let's see, and he was the highest of the Kadash, both the East and the West. And he wore a goat horn crown and had a staff or a wand, which was a symbol of the elect. And we see that Thoth attributes a divine nature to the serpent. And when we get into the serpent and the mysteries, and Thoth showing reverence to the serpents, let's see.
I mean, that kind of goes along with the staff. So
the staff and the serpent,
Yep.
Yeah. So when we get into the serpent, are you familiar with Isis and the creation of the serpent?
No, not really, actually.
No, so
I don't remember it. Yeah, you might have at one point.
There's a point at which Isis basically creates the serpent, and she sets it free, and somehow it comes back and bites Ra. And I think it was the tears. She used the tears of Ra to create the serpent. And then the serpent bit Ra. And then she essentially told Ra that the only way that she could heal him was if she knew his true name, which she never shared with anybody, because that's how you can have people take control over you, is if they know your real name, right? So nonetheless, she said, well, in order for me to heal you, you have to give me your true name. So Ra told her his true name, and then she was able to heal him. And then that's when Isis became known as the knower of all the names. So she essentially knows all the names, like as far as your nicknames and your your birth name and your secret name. So she basically, anytime that something was going on, Isis, you know, she was able to control everything because she knew all the names, you know. But but Isis was essentially, in one of the stories, responsible for the creation of the serpent, right?
Have you ever heard the story with? This is like another reason why sometimes I wonder if, you know, like maybe Isis and Hathor or different other female goddesses might be like the same person, just at different times. Because there's also a story with Hathor where something, I don't remember exactly what it was, what was going on, but Hathor, I think, went to Ra to go make him like change or do something. She needed him to get him to do something, and so what she did was get naked in front of him.
Yep.
And showed off her shit, and for some reason or like he was in a slumber, in a bad mood, I don't know what it was. She needed to change him for some reason, and it like made him laugh, actually.
Yeah.
And then like brought him out of like whatever she wanted to bring him out of. But it's like funny how like these female goddesses, there's stories of them going before them and just having their own ways of getting Ra to do what he wants with them.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Sexuality, and that's the whole thing, man. You know, sexuality. You figure before all our obsession with all these distractions that we live in within now, you know, sex was a sacred function, and it, you know, all the different aspects of, you know, beauty and lust and all these different things, you know, they're essentially aspects of movement and function, and you know, and that's why sex magic in the later, you know, all the cults that we see now is such a prominent thing, is because this generative force has such a refined form of power within it that you know, these people think that they're able to harvest and use and basically precipitate into their own means, you know. So now the serpent, as the most esteemed of all the dragon reptiles, of a fiery nature, exhibited incredible celebrity, moving, gliding by its own spirit, being long-lived by its ability to shed its skin, renewing its youth. All of this is recorded in the sacred books upon which account this earthly animal is introduced into the sacred rites and the mysteries. And it was also Isis, we see, who had created the serpent. And with the coming of the dog star and the flooding of the Nile, this was also representative of this yearly function of renewal that was symbolic of the snake shedding its skin, you know?
You know,
so
I just wanted to ask you real quick, again, Robbie, just your opinion. You think like the snake and the dragon, could that again be almost like the same thing, just at a different time? And you know, like just like an alchemical change between. Oh yeah.
Well, and other. You have you have all these different reptile type entities, and they all lay this idea of this egg. So, you know, they all lay eggs, and the serpent crawls on its belly or glides across the earth, they thought, with the use of no legs. Whereas as you evolve, then the crocodile does have legs, you know. So you have, I think, multiple stacked layers of these reptoid type entities that represent different aspects of earthly phenomena.
Yeah, I mean, you get snakes, you have frogs, you have alligators. You got a lot of these green things that are always representing different things.
So let's see. Now it was Thoth, who was the counselor of Thamos, who was also known as Nimrod. So it's funny that back to Nimrod, man. But it's funny that, you know, Thoth is the counselor of Isis in the moon. He's the counselor of Ra in the heavens, and he's also the counselor to Nimrod. So again, you know, this gets back to the idea of my associating Osiris. Yeah, Osiris with Nimrod, essentially. So let's see. It was also Thoth, or the Greek Hermes, who was the numberer, identified with the moon. And Thoth was Lord of the Moon and the dispenser of time, and held a palm branch emblematic of the year. And we would see in later times that it would be Many or Mani who would become the Lord of the Moon, which I think also is an evolution of Thoth into another cultural personification, being Many.
Do you think there's any similarities between him and Afkaf Nakansu? I don't even know if you know who he is. Because that is a male deity that can also be associated with the moon. But so I think Thoth can be also. And I was just wondering, is that just taking Thoth and again now going down the timeline, is that just humanizing him more now? And is that why that god is associated with the moon? Could it still be Thoth, just not the bird anymore? You know what I'm getting at?
Right.
I was just wondering if that was like something that maybe you came across.
No, I don't know. I don't know.
All right.
So let's see. Now, interestingly enough, this links Lord Thoth with the goddess Tekka, which we had talked about as far as holding the palm branch and weaving the palm leaves, basically teching time, which is where we get the origin of technology as far as this tracking of the heavens, right?
Oh, wow.
The goddess Tekka. And Thoth basically absorbed all the qualities of this ancient goddess Tekka, who was the one who measured the movements of the heavens. And then he became the one who measured the movements of the heavens, Let's see. And let's see. This also relates to Nana, Isis, Ishtar, as the lunar goddess in a very morning star, evening star way, as Lucifer and Venus.
Yeah, I just want to mention real quick, you just said something and I don't want to forget and get too far off. You mentioned something about him being in control or something associated with the movements of the sky.
Right.
When you look at the eighth sphere on the bottom of the tree where Thoth, Mercury, they would all fall. In my opinion, that is just the lower arc of Jupiter, which is Chesed, which is the fourth sphere right across from it, on the tree. Even though that's the fourth sphere, the Wheel of Fortune that has 8 slices, just like Hod, falls on that side. You get the color blue. As silly as it sounds, I think that also has something to do with the blue skies we think we're looking at, and 8 pieces. So I could even see how you're seeing on a higher arc. Could that energy, Thoth at a higher arc, have something to do with the clock in the sky?
Oh, yeah.
To me, you know what I'm saying? It's like some Hunger Games shit right there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and Jupiter also, when you go back and you look at that, it's Jupiter or God the Father. So, if that ties in.
All the time.
Interesting.
Yeah. So let's see. Light of the shadow. Okay. Yeah, I already went into that as far as he's the secret wisdom in the dark side of the moon.
That's even funny how they say that, because on the left pillar, that would be like the dark pillar. And he's associated with wisdom, so.
Right. Yeah. So let's see.
Would you look at that maybe as like the wisdom of things not seen?
Yeah. The hidden, the occulted, kind of like the unseen, like Quasimodo,
Quasimodo.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, I mean, that's...
if that's all you got on for him, we can just move on to Isis and Osiris, if you like.
Yeah, I think let's move into the Isis Osiris mysteries there and start looking at that. Let me get to the page here. So now, when we get into the Osiris mystery, what we have to look at is that this didn't come about until later development in the turning. you essentially had these god forms, and then at a certain point, I think it was in the First Kingdom, that you essentially have the Isis Osiris mystery coming about. And when we talk about this Osiris Isis mystery, what we have to look at is that this is the story that becomes the foundation of, I think, every dead and resurrected king. And I think it's why Jesus basically came and had to be a resurrected king, kind of, bringing us into the age of Pisces and the energy of that movement. And it's just interesting that all this ties into Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and the Masonic orders, and and it's just funny how I think it was in Ezekiel, where basically they talk about, keep all the tradition the same as it is, but take the Egyptian mysteries out of the Christian, personification, which basically carries us into the Christ or the Christian, story of Jesus and the Christ child, as one of the many. I see many of these Christ or Christ-like entities through time, almost like these avatars that have come down, but nonetheless, with Osiris being reborn into Horus, we see essentially the death and the resurrection as the template, in my opinion.
I think it's just interesting to that I want to add. And you were kind of saying it early on when you started. There's also different beliefs, like even you're following like Egyptian stuff. And this is another reason why sometimes I do think that some goddesses or gods are just the same person, right? Is because, like, if you look back farther, I found this interesting even in the OTO. Maybe it was just because what was known then, but like even the Egyptian pantheon, the way Crowley was like using it in the OTO, is more of the newer stuff. Yeah. Because like if you want to go back farther, before Isis was like the head bitch, Hathor was. Right. Hathor was much more popular than Isis was in the beginning. Yep. She was like the head bitch to Ra. Ra had her turn into, I forgot whatever it was, and went and slaughtered people and got drunk on the blood of it. Yes, because they were acting out. Yeah. Yeah. She was very much in charge then.
Yeah, she was originally Sekhmet. And I guess what the deal was, the Egyptians had lived in such peace that they started to lose interest in the gods. So Sekhmet was created.
Ra was not happy with that.
Yeah. So Sekhmet was created and like basically just went in and was devouring whole like towns of people, just eating them whole. And like they said, after the first day, her entire coat was completely covered in blood.
They sent in a supposedly like a big thing of wine, making her think it was blood.
Yeah,
because she was so bloodthirsty. They had to get her shit faced so she'd stop.
Blood drunk.
Yeah, literally. It was 70,000 or 7,000 or
7. There was a number 7 in there, which I was like,
casks of these. It was beer that they tinted with ochre or the red
dye.
Red dye, right? Mm-hmm. And they laid it out. And when she came, she thought that they were like giving her, alms, and so she wouldn't eat the rest of the people. And then she got drunk. And then Ra was like, do you want to be this wrathful, vengeful thing? Or do you want to be this healing, and she chose to become Hathor rather than being Sekhmet. So, yeah. And Hathor, we're going to talk about Hathor later when we get into the Set and Horus and the fight, Yeah. So, now Osiris and Set, let's see. So, and we talked about earlier how in the womb of the cosmos, Osiris and Isis were already like these star-crossed lovers from before the time that they were even born, right? And when the division was divided up between the 4 siblings, being Isis, Osiris, Set, and Nephthys, right? Osiris and Isis were like a natural couple, right? So they kind of got together, and then Nephthys was left to Set. And it said a lot that Nephthys was the balancing force of Set, that she kept him level, she kept him grounded so he wouldn't fly off the handle. But nonetheless, Nephthys really missed her brother and her sister, Osiris and Isis, right? And they were basically in their separate temples, you know, in their different nomes. So Nephthys went to visit Osiris and Isis, right? And with Isis's consent, Osiris and Nephthys started a sexual love affair, right? And this eventually led to Isis joining in, right? So you have basically this threesome going on between Osiris, Nephthys, and Isis,
Of course.
right?
Dang.
And yeah, so Set, he was, you know, in his own gnome, and he was like, well, where is Nephthys? You know, she's probably over there with Osiris and Isis again. So he goes over there and he finds Nephthys in this menage a trois with, you know, Osiris and Isis. And he gets really upset. And even from the beginning, he had liked Isis more than he liked Nephthys. But, you know, already Isis was, you know, kind of rolled up in Osiris. So what happened was Set begins to plan the destruction of Osiris, right? And there's a bunch of different stories, but the one I find most interesting is that Set actually measured Osiris's shadow to determine his size, right? And basically Set constructs this box, and it's like a sarcophagus or a coffin or a box, and it's all jewel encrusted and like just super beautifully, you know, put together. And so he throws this big banquet, and all of the gods except for, I think it was Ra, and there was a couple of them that couldn't come because they had duties in the heavens to take care of, right? And so like halfway through the banquet, Set is like, you know, he brings out the jeweled box, and he's like, you know, this box, it will fit one of the gods perfectly, and whoever it fits perfectly, they get to keep it. They get to have this jewel encrusted, beautiful, you know, sarcophagus. So all the gods, they line up, you know, and they try to get in the box, and some are too big and some are too small. And I think this honestly might be where we get the Cinderella slipper story from.
Or Goldilocks.
Or the Goldilocks. So, yeah.
Maybe.
But as far as the trying on of the slipper,
True.
and, you know, but nonetheless, once Osiris, you know, gets in the box, he's like, oh, look, brother, it fits me perfectly. He's like, I get the prize. And he's like, yeah, you do. And they throw the top on,
Bam.
and they close him. And this is, I think, in relation to the first death of the mortal body, right? This is when you see like Skull and Bones and how they have you go into the coffin, and then you get the lion's paw grip and they pull you out and you're reborn. This first death is the death to the mortal world, right? Symbolically within the ideas of the esoteric function. So basically they take the box with Osiris in it, and they haul it out. And, you know, there's different stories of, there was 72 of these co-conspirators. Sometimes it was said there was 72 judges against Osiris. But I think the 72 essentially relates to the turning of a degree and the turning of the heavens, as far as the the movement of the turning of the ages, right?
Do you
So
think
this
that goes back to anything to do with the 72 demons of the Goetia?
I think that has to do with the 72 degrees of 1 degree of the turning of the ages as well.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. And that's and when you go into even Washington, D.C., with the apotheosis of George Washington in the Capitol Dome, there's 72 stars around that circle there as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, all these Masonic founding fathers and the apotheosis, and this is all playing off this idea of Osiris and the new risen man god, essentially. And that was the other thing. When you get into a lot of these philosophies, there's a lot of talk in different places about the idea that all of these characters were once humans. And they basically ascended to the point where they became gods, almost like personified. And once you pour a certain amount of energy into these personifications, they almost become like egregores, Yes. So it's like George Washington, how we almost personify him now as a sort of a god of the Americas. It's
Really?
yeah.
You got that right.
So, yeah, let's see. Now Plutarch states that the date upon which this occurred, when Osiris was nailed in the box, was the 7th day of the month of Athar. And this was when the sun was in the constellation of Scorpio or Scorpius. And we see also this is the same time. Yeah, this is the same time when Jesus gets the kiss from Judas. This is the same time when Noah basically seals the door to the ark and is cast on the waters of the deep. So this time point carries over. We see echoing through multiple events through all of history. As far as sacred type of events, right?
That's interesting that you mentioned Scorpio.
Yeah.
Because even in the ritual, depends. I mean, it doesn't make a difference if you're doing the lesser or the greater or the invoking or banishing. But the LVX formula in the hexagram rituals, it goes you do Isis. There's certain things that like God forms that you will make and certain things that you will say, and you do follow Isis, Virgo Isis, and then you have, you do call out Scorpio, and that's supposed to be like the beast rising,
right?
And then after that, Osiris is risen again. Yep. So I find that interesting how like even that that Scorpio is playing into that, and what you just said right there, because I do think, in a sense, what that is showing you, the death of the body and the transcending of the soul, that is when Osiris rises, I think.
Right.
And that's showing, I think, the death and the rebirth.
Right.
Interestingly, our favorite rap pop star Drake had an album Scorpion back in, I don't know when it was. And then another associated act of his, Miguel, has like 2 scorpion tattoos, like right here. Yeah. And they did that later in their career. It wasn't like right away. Yeah.
You remember old Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five had that song Scorpio back in the day?
I remember that.
I don't know.
No?
I have to look it up.
I'm telling you my age now.
No, it's okay.
So now, this being the first death of Osiris, being closed in the casket, is the initiation of mortality in this world, right? And Plutarch tells us that the Pans and the Satyrs, being nature's spirit elements, were the first to know of Osiris's death or his murder. And they all raised alarm, or the first panic, right? So, and now, while Isis, she later heard the news from some children that had seen the murderers taking the box to the waters to put it into the what was it, the Euphrates? Or no, it was the Nile. It was the Nile. And so let's see. Now Isis immediately, once she heard that this had happened to her husband, she immediately robed herself in mourning and set out to look for the body in this casket, right? And at some length, Isis discovered that the chest had floated to the city of Byblos. And there it was lodged in the branches of a great tamarisk tree, right? And I'm pretty sure the tamarisk tree is the same tree as the acacia tree, which is the tree in the region that has the highest proportion of DMT within it, as far as dimethyltryptamine, you know? So when we get into this whole idea of consciousness and Isis and Osiris relating to the pituitary and the production of dimethyltryptamine, which is more a modern philosophical kind of idea.
Isn't that the same thing that like Jim Carrey even gets into if you see his whole Santa Claus thing? He even talks about how like it's
colostrum.
Like
yeah, same kind of idea, right?
Yeah. Did Lee? Did you ever hear the Texasist on Lee's show? I've had him on a few times.
I don't know.
Yeah, he's really good. He covers how he thinks like the whole arc and everything, all that stuff. Denial, it's all in your brain and your head.
All in your brain. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive work from that guy.
Yeah, nice.
It's interesting for sure.
I'll have to check it out. Let's see. Now this tamarisk tree, right? It's got a lot of roots and stuff, so it kind of like caught the sarcophagus with Osiris in it, right? And because of who Osiris was and his energy, the tamarisk tree kind of grabbed up the box and grew around it, right? And they said in one day the tree grew around this sarcophagus with Osiris in it, right? And completely subsumed it inside itself. And this so amazed the king of this Phoenician land, seeing this colossal tree growing where there was none before, that it led this king Melquart, also who had the title Baal, to chop down this tree and use it in his great royal palace, where its beautiful, fragrant perfume delighted all. So basically, this Melquart, he chopped down this tamarisk tree and fashioned it into a pillar for his temple, right? And it said that it gave off like this very fragrant aroma that all the people like loved, and there's actually even one of the stories details that this was the way in which Isis found the pillar, was this beautiful fragrance that was emanating from it, right? But she told King Melquart that Osiris was inside of the pillar, right? So here you have a god in a coffin, in a tree, in a palace, right? And they basically crack it open, and Osiris he falls out, and Isis basically does some workings and resuscitates him and brings him back to good health, right? So now when we look at this idea of this casket going to Byblos, right? This was where paper from the papyrus was first started. It first came into use in regard to paper making, right? So there's this whole philosophy that this is the time when Egypt associated itself with Phoenicia, because Byblos was in Phoenicia, right? And essentially, and also Byblos is where we get our modern word Bible or book, right? So, but this is also thought that this is when the writing system of physical letters rather than hieroglyphs came into Egypt and started to be used, So as far as the linking of cultures and the moving of forces, and then this is also the first reference to the idea of the Djed pillar. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
No. So the Djed pillar is essentially Osiris's spine, right? And it's looked at within Egyptian mythology as like the world pillar. So like if you look into like the Norse mythology or a lot of these different that have this idea of this pillar that almost holds up the earth itself, right? But it was the idea that the world was hung on this Djed pillar. And so if you see in different bas reliefs, like the wall carvings in Egypt, right? And you'll see sometimes they have this pillar that almost looks like a Tesla coil on top, where it has the different nubs coming out of it, and they're always holding it at like a 23-degree angle, right? You'll see it's always tilted. That is essentially the tilt of the earth, and the pillar itself is the spine of Osiris that basically holds the earth in the heavens. Yeah, so that's the Djed pillar.
Reminds me of the Janus stuff with the pillar,
Right?
that Jonah mentioned last week.
Isn't there a depiction too of like the ancient world, and it's like a tree, and then it like envelops, almost like a flat Earth depiction?
Yeah,
the tree is the center, and then it's enveloping the world.
All the worlds, and then the archons are around that.
Maybe, yeah. It's a specific one I'm thinking.
Yeah,
of,
I know what
but
you're
it
talking
reminds me
about.
of that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Now
It almost makes flat Earth look like one of those cake dishes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like a flat cake stand. Yeah, exactly.
Like a hunt cake.
You have like the dome that goes on top.
With the center in the middle. Yeah,
totally. That's funny.
Yeah.
So now, once Isis got Osiris right and revived him, they go back, to their nome in Egypt, and Set finds out that Osiris is still alive, right? And Set gets just absolutely furious, even more so than before, because he thought he was done. Thought he was done with his brother, right? So he decides he's going to kill him again, right? So that's when he comes and chops up his body into the miscellaneous pieces, right? And I've seen in the different stories, I've seen 45 pieces, I've seen 46 pieces, but within the modern symbolic, like occult theology, you generally see 14 pieces. And this is where you get, and with the 14 pieces, right, you have the 13 that she was able to find, and then the one being the phallus that was missing, right? So when you have John Podesta with his hands, and it says 14 and it has a fish, this is what he's referring to, in my opinion.
Gross.
Yeah. I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now let's see. Now this cutting up of Osiris's body, we also see echoed later on in the Bible, in regard to Judges 29, when the Levite traveling home with his concubine is essentially raped to death by the Benjamites, right? They basically take the body of the concubine after she's dead, and they cut her up into 12 pieces, and they send her to the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is basically starts a war against the Benjamites, when you get down, in that whole spectrum biblically, right?
Dang.
And let's see, it says it may be possible that Set or Seth, and that's the other thing. When with Set, and you start to eat, like I was mentioning, even the Egyptian antiquities department, if you go to their website in Egypt, they refer to Set as Seth, which ties us back into the Bible and one of the sons of Noah, essentially, right? So there's this whole idea that Ham may have been Osiris, and that Set or Seth basically came in to end some of these mystery labyrinth practices that were going on in the Egyptian labyrinth that was, that's now lost to the sands of time. So it's interesting that depending on what side of the story you're on, Set or Seth can either be the good character or the bad character.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
But I think it's interesting how it ties in biblically as far as, the character itself, So let's see.
Even what you were saying, Robby, before, how Osiris basically dies twice.
Yep.
That reminds me of like Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. He's stabbed to death once, and then he's revived by the Scarlet Woman, the Red Woman. And then, he doesn't die, I guess, a second time, but not yet, anyway.
Not yet. Well, he dies eventually.
Eventually. Yeah, totally.
But he's a resurrected man.
Yeah, that hero arc, that same, Christ-type figure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there was a Scarlet Woman involved.
That's what I'm saying.
All the horror, man.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, Plutarch tells us that Isis set out immediately to recover these 14 pieces of the pharaoh's body, and she used a boat made of papyrus rush. And this papyrus rush, papyrus was essentially the same thing that they used to make the paper, right, for the books. And this papyrus rush boat was a very light boat, so it would float on the surface of these swampy areas, basically skimming the surface, making it easy for her to pass through these swampy regions, right? And she was tracking down these miscellaneous parts. And in one story I found, she actually is using hellhounds. She has hellhounds that she's brought with her to track these parts down, right? And then if you get into Manly P. Hall, he says that she had 7 scorpions or 7 golden scorpions that she also brought with her on this boat to basically hunt down these parts. And I think that these parts, when you get into the idea of cutting up the god and back to Nimrod, in Mesopotamia and Sumer and Akkad, young Nimrod was called Ninus or Nin, and he was shaved or clipped, and that's where the tonsure comes from of the monks, where they have the ring around their head. And to Nimrod or young Ninus, when he died before he was resurrected, the worshippers of Nin or Ninus would essentially cut themselves with, like sharp things to basically signify the cutting up of this god, before he's resurrected. So this cutting up of this god, it kind of carries into from Osiris into Jupiter Zagreus, into Tammuz, which is Ninus or Nimrod, and into Adonis, Attis, and even Dionysus, as far as handed down. And if we look in Asia, even still to this day, they have a ritual where they scatter these sacred bones of the Buddha around, right? And supposedly they're scattered around the earth. And what they do is they have a seeker that will come in and look for the bones full of grief and, crying and sorrow until the priest announces that all the bones have been found. And then, they would all celebrate, basically, right? So we even see this in modern times in some of these Buddhist practices, they say that this scattering of the bones dates back to the Tatarians in the steppe. So basically back to ancient Tataria, even, with this ritual scattering of the bones. Now, upon finding all of the parts of Osiris, with the exception of the phallus, which we talked about, the fish, right? That catfish. There's a couple different fish, the Lepidodus or the Phagorus fish are the two that were said that gobbled up this organ. And I still relate this story how you New York related the idea that this fish coming in and gobbling up this phallus also represents kind of the end of one of these religious type functions and the beginning of the Christian ethos, you know? And that's the Christian fish basically coming after this, you know, this ancient practice of these Patar stones or the worship of phallus, right? So then Isis, now that's the other thing. When you get into these stories, one of the most common ones you're going to hear that's personified through popular sources is the idea that Osiris is resurrected as Horus, and he is basically in man form, and then they make love to produce Horus, right? But if you dig, there's actually several other stories that are a little more occulted, where essentially Isis, using necromantic spells in a ritual summoning of Osiris's spirit from the underworld, she perches over the body, right? Now what she has done is she's essentially taken these 13 pieces, right? And she's hemmed them together and then wrapped them in bandages, right? And this is when we see the first mummy. Osiris is the first mummy, which is where we get all our ritual embalming that came after this, right? And that's why it was important when you get into Isis talking to Anubis at one point, right? He was the Lord of the Dead at the time, and he basically was like, you know, if his body was whole, I could resurrect him because I'm the Lord of the Dead. I could just do that. But because his body is not whole, he has no body to go into, so it's not possible, basically, right? So there's this whole other line of thinking where essentially she built the first obelisk, right, representing his penis or his phallus, right? And in some of the stories, it was made of earth and mud. There was even one story that I found where it was a solid gold basically obelisk or phallus, right? And she places this on the mummy, and then, like it said in the text, it says like a crane, she basically levitated over the mummy, right? And flapping and fanning her wings, basically like we see, you know, in the other creation myths and the Bible, we see this dove of the, you know, the Holy Spirit that is the fanner, that is basically bringing the spirit into, you know, how we talked about the poffer breathing the life into the bread, right? So she turns into this force where she's like breathing life into, you know, and separating the heavens from the earth, and she draws the seed of Osiris from the underworld up through this dead corpse body, this first mummy, through this obelisk, and inseminates herself with the obelisk, right? And then after that, we see the setting up of this ritual fertility festival that's dedicated to the Patar stone or the father stone, which is generally what all these tall standing stones are that you see. Anytime you just see a big tall standing stone, that is essentially a phallic representation of this lord of the underworld, breathing new life into the risen man.
Have you ever thought about Frankenstein in this story?
And Mary Shelley, she calls it the modern Prometheus, and Promethea, being cut up and put back together. But I think 100% that Frankenstein is a representation of Osiris as well. Yeah.
That's wild.
Interesting. I was thinking about that as he was going on.
Yeah,
that makes me think
for
of
sure.
Frankenstein a little bit here.
Now it and when let's see if there's anything else here. Yeah. So okay, so Plutarch, he asserts that the Greek recognized Osiris in the figures of Dionysus and Bacchus as the same but revered under other names, right? And so now this basically leads to the birth of Horus from the seed of Osiris. And whether it's the resurrected living Osiris or, you know, I honestly would have a tendency more to think that Horus is the resurrected Osiris. Otherwise, Osiris is being resurrected twice. I think that the story's been kind of, you know, homogenized and put into eyes to be a little more acceptable rather than this idea of this necromantic process of summoning up the seed of the earth, you know. But nonetheless, once Horus is born, you know, Thoth comes again and basically says, you know, you have to hide Horus away because Set wants to kill him, you know, because he knows, you know, that so Thoth basically says, I have this secret place that you can take Horus to, right? And it's called Chemia, which we talked about chem earlier. And this, I think, Chemia kind of falls more into getting closer to alchemy. But this was basically like, you know how you see, like in photos, there'll be like an oasis in the desert with like palms and like a body of water flowing through it. And it's like just a beautiful little, this is kind of like what this Chemia place was, right? And essentially, Isis took Horus to this oasis hidden away where nobody would know where they were, and raised Horus, you know, from, you know, to an adult. And Horus never had really a purpose as a god. He looked exactly like Amun, though, with the hawk head, and, you know, but he never really was given a purpose. And every time Isis would ask Thoth or Tahuti about, you know, what was going to become of Horus, Thoth would just put his finger to his lips and give the symbol of silence. Like he knew a secret, you know, that basically, and that's the other thing. Once Osiris was killed and became the lord of the underworld, right? It was said that the sun stopped rising. So, you know, and basically the earth turned dark, and Set ruled over this time in history where there was no sun. And basically Ra was in the underworld with Osiris, right? Because every night as the cycle would go, we talked about that cycle, in, you know, as far as the 5 turning points of Ra and how he was turned on his head and brought back, right? But Osiris is in the underworld with Ra, basically plotting the destruction of Set, right? So it's so Set's ruling over this dark time. Even like the temple that Set had taken over, they said it was all dilapidated and mold was growing in it, and it was just like everything was turning foul and sour, and, you know, but nonetheless, Horus, it comes to the point eventually where Horus decides, he's like, my purpose is to take down Set. That is my purpose as a god. He comes to his own like self-determination. So rather than being assigned to, and here we have the expression of the evolution of free will as well, you know, like I think a lot of these mysteries basically pertained to taking the individual from the idea of fate or fata or doom and giving the personification of free will or individual sovereign thought. Like
gives you agency.
Yeah, individual agency, right.
Mm-hmm.
So Horus, he decides he's going to basically go confront Set, and so he basically goes and when he first comes to the temple of Set, all of Set and his associates think that it's Amun, because he has the hawk head and he looks just like Amun. And so Set comes in, or Horus comes into the temple, and Set actually bows down to Horus until he realizes that it's not Amun. And then he gets just really pissy, right? And so they have basically this almost like cosmic wizard battle. And I'm not going to really go into that a lot. But this is the point at which Horus loses his eye, And it's, let's see. So Horus from the underworld. Okay. So in this eye of Horus is essentially a sort of an all-seeing eye it's related to. And it's seen as the third eye in Hinduism by some. It's called the Ajna, coming from Oz, which is a title that was used by both Enoch and Cain. And this all-seeing third eye as the certain eye, which discovers the 64 black stones deciphered like Osiris's parts. And these 64 deciphered stones represent the perfect black cube. So
stop.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Always goes back to the friggin' cube.
Right. And as far as Osiris being associated with the black rock or the black stone, right? The bones of Osiris were said to be made of lodestone, or basically like a magnetic like hematite, right? So when we're getting into the black stone, the magnetic properties, it's just very interesting in regard symbolically to, the bones of Osiris, right?
Like goo.
And let's see.
The black goo.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you get into the black goo, what is that magnetic fluid that they're using, to basically get those structures? I mean, and then you get into graphene. And
yeah, I was going to say
looking at all the crazy stuff that's been going on.
And there you go.
Yeah, it's just wild stuff.
Yeah.
So,
nothing new under the sun.
Right.
No.
And I probably mentioned it before, but the Egyptians humming the 7 vowels, A-E-I-O-U, sometimes Y and sometimes W. Those were all like sacred sounds, but that was said to be the hymn of Osiris, right? Which eventually became the singing of the planets to Pythagoras, which eventually became our modern tuning of our musical instruments that we use now.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see. So basically the key to the story, though, is that Osiris is reborn, not into an ordinary life, but into a higher state of consciousness. This is much in the same way that Gandalf in Lord of the Rings kind of ascends above the gray to the white.
Especially after they thought he died, too.
Right. So again, we see this story, man. These dead and risen figures over and over, ascending into higher forms, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
His name starts with a G.
What's that?
His name starts with a G.
Yep. So let's see now. If we look at the Book of Coming Forth, or the Book of the Life, or as people like to call it, the Book of the Dead, Osiris proclaims, I shall not decay, I shall not rot, I shall not putrefy, I shall not turn into worms, I shall have my being, I shall live, I shall live. And so now, according to R.T. Rundle Clark, in his book Myth and Symbol in Egypt, The eye of the Horus consists of 64 parts, like we talked about, representing that perfect black cube that have been scattered and need to be reassembled. And that each missing part through the descending geometric series from 1/2 to 1/4 to 1/8 put together all make 63 out of 64. So there's this certain math equation, I think it's Euclid's 52nd proposition, that basically you do this math formula and there's always one part missing, right? And so put together it makes 63 out of 64 with that single part missing, just like Osiris with the part missing, right? And
do you think sometimes that's like the one that, you know, when we've mentioned
the
before,
center of the circle?
Yeah, or like adding a 1 to a number. That's you know, significance to it sometimes.
Oh yeah.
You're plus one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and every time you go to an event or something, you know, and you get the plus one.
Right.
So now this leads Thoth at one point to say, "I came seeking the eye of Horus, that I may bring it back and count it." Let's see, and and then I have here now within this rising cult of Horus, right? Horus at one point actually, in one of the stories, is the husband of the child Isis and is said to cut off his mother's head, right? And that was essentially when Isis worship became demoted, and you no longer see Isis as the main figure holding the child, much like we see in all these different personifications of the Madonna, you know. And also in Babylon at the same time that this happened, it was said that Ninus, resurrected as Nimrod, cut off Inanna's head, right? So here we have this happening in both these cultures. Horus cutting off Isis's head, and Nimrod cutting off Inanna's head, right? And within the Babylonian culture, Inanna is resurrected. That's when Inanna is resurrected as Juno. And then we see later, like in Virgil, you know, Juno's coming in and basically settling parts of Europe. So, and it's much like at the fall of the Tower of Babel, when I think Nimrod the Elder fled and becomes Saturnus or Latinus, becoming basically the birth of the Latin language. You know, you can see again, dying and resurrecting gods and goddesses. Mm-hmm. It's just it's part of the whole, you know.
You think sometimes that is just a separation, and like, you know, I like again before I was going to mention it with Horus. You know, talking about the, you know, Horus maybe just representing something. Could Horus have been just Amun-Ra's other, you know, half here?
Yeah.
You know, like I mentioned before, I think even gods with the letter H at the beginning of their name do show a separation or something.
Right.
I've seen someone say they thought that Hercules might have been Zeus, but in like just a different lower arc.
Oh, for sure.
You know, so like is Horus showing that again? And
well, and it's the idea, you know, with the Ka, you have your essential personality, and then you have the Ba, which is so you have these energetic forms of yourself, you know, and it's like you know, on the multiple levels of dimensional thinking, are we existing on all those levels simultaneously?
We have the option to.
Each one of those is a different, you know, personification of that entity.
That's
right?
what I think, yes.
Yeah. But now also with the eye of Horus, right? Once he loses that eye in the battle with Set, it was Hathor that basically, what happened, so I think it was from Set's head. Somehow Set took the eye, and from Set's head, a sun disk came out of his head, and Hathor took it, and that's the sun disk that she wears on her head. So I find that interesting too, you know. It's Yeah, but we do see later on in later Egyptian culture that amulets, this eye of Horus became a popular sigil, basically, and they crafted like this blue-green ceramic called Phaenis, and they called the eye the Wadjet eye, and it was like a common, thing, and it represented like healing and restoration, and like it had all these positive and sacrifice as well, because he sacrificed his eye in regard to defeating Set, right? But that was the other thing. I found some stories where Set never died, and they say that this reminds us that evil is always amongst us, right? Whereas you find other stories that Set, once he died, he went into the underworld and basically was under the administration of Anubis, who was Nephthys and Osiris's son. So basically, Anubis, basically being the lord, of the dead in the underworld, basically has dominion over Set and he basically, there's one story where he offers Set that as long as he never goes and bothers the humans, in physical form on the earth again, that he'll set up a temple to Set in the underworld. So there's this temple that's supposed to, that Set's supposed to be happily occupying in the underworld under the authority of Anubis as well,
Wild story,
right?
Yeah. I was even. It's funny when you were even talking about Nephthys before. Like I had like thoughts of Anubis in the back of my head, and it's just they all seem to like all be parts of like just this ongoing developing story.
Yes,
like they all interweave,
constantly morphing.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing, within the many legends and stories, starting in the oldest, and the further you come into the new, the more these legends expand, the more that's written about them, the more contradictions that arise. But it's I find it also interesting, with Crowley. And then getting into Kenneth Grant and the order, the Typhonian mysteries, that he's propagating. Kenneth Grant goes into a good amount of detail in regard to the Dog Star, right? When it was in its highest peak, right? As the Dog Star, or Sirius B, essentially, right? Which is what the the Dagonians were actually worshiping Sirius B, which we didn't know was really there until we got the modern telescope. And they've known about it for thousands of years, So yeah, that's interesting factor there too. But with Kenneth Grant, he talks about within Crowley's philosophy, the idea that when the Dog Star was at its peak in the dog days of summer, right? That Sirius B, or that Sirius little star cluster, was behind the sun at noonday time, right? So this is where we get the idea of the origin of the sun behind the sun, or the black sun, another personification of the black sun. But Kenneth Grant also says that that Set is Sirius B, that he's actually the center of that star, that is the star that represents Sirius, right? Which is Merca to the Freemasons, right? And basically Set being the sun behind the sun, being the black sun. And I just wonder how much that ties into the Masonic orders and their reverence to the Dog Star as Merca, Yeah.
I've seen a lot of stuff, people getting into like the Dog Star and certain things with like the North Pole and all that shit. You do start getting some weird shapes and like occult symbols. You could start playing with that stuff.
Yeah.
Even I think like the black sun symbol with the Nazis is just like something just repeating itself and spinning in the sky with stars. Yep. that's really it. Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, man, that's pretty much that's the whole of the mystery as far as Isis and Osiris, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was really, there was a lot of stuff in there I didn't, that's why I have you on. I don't know it either.
Yeah. Well, and even in my own memory, man, I have to go back and look at notes because it's just, when you're just dumping the stuff on your brain day after day, it's, you only have so much room,
Oh, you know what I did want to mention before when we were talking about I guess the monuments and stuff or whatever, the phallic symbols.
Mm.
I didn't realize until, maybe a few months ago. And I think I had somebody on my show actually mention it and show it, but it didn't click in my head until I started, I think, looking at the Washington Monument because it's near 17th Street. But
Yep.
it even has the Vesica Pisces symbol on the ground.
It does.
And that pillar is right in the middle. I mean, in my opinion, and I still say I don't think literal sex has to be going on, but I do think that is a sex magic symbol in itself right there.
Well, the Vesica Pisces, where you get that shape in the center, we also see, if you look at within Christian mythology, constantly you'll see Christ emerging from that shape that's in the center of the Vesica Pisces, and you follow that back, and those two circles merging, basically the 2 points in space, giving you the line. Or from above, it's a pyramid, but that is the birth canal of the divine, cosmic, feminine energy that's birthing all of creation. Mm-hmm. And so you take that divine, feminine birth canal, and you take the pillar or the phallus, essentially, and you put that right on it. They're telling you straight up that that's sex magic,
That's why, that's even why I think the OTO has been deemed sex magic, because the OTO Laman in itself is the same shape.
Right.
But
for sure.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. And then, and that leads us right up to the Capitol Dome, being representative of Isis's impregnated belly with the new risen god, George Washington, inside of a pentagram, wrapped in those 72 stars, and then if you go through the basement there, they have the Mayan calendar in the basement there, right underneath that, which is a whole nother level of the turning of the ages. And yeah.
Interesting.
What did I miss there?
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Came back at a good time.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's just all really interesting how if you know these symbols and you know these characters and you just see it over and over repetitiously, it's yeah.
So it's just I think you'll start seeing a picture trying to be painted if you understand what you're looking at.
Mm.
Yeah, a lot of the same things, I just think artistically done differently, but if you kind of know what you're looking for, you'll see it.
Right. Well, and like we talked about before, every symbol has 7 meanings, and every one of those has 7 meanings. So if you start to, and it's been a lifetime process of learning about all this symbolism, and it's to such an open and great extent that it's probably feasibly more than you could ever understand in your lifetime. Mm-hmm. But I find it interesting that it all really symbolically comes down to the foundation and the building blocks of what reality is around us and how systems work and things function and things turn and process. It's on a micro to the macro.
Yes, everything is cyclical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing new under the sun.
No.
Exactly. Just different ways of showing it.
Right.
Well,
it's cool to figure out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I real quick, I'll even say, sometimes I think taking symbols or even certain things that are associated with the spheres, if you start twisting them just even in certain, just turning them around, you could start seeing similarities to other things. And I have even, like you said, everything has its own 7 meanings. I even think it might have something to do, even like with the clock sky, but it's just a different click for that thing.
Yep.
It means something different. It does something different. It's hard to explain what I'm trying to get at, but yeah.
Let's see. I want to do some math here real quick and see how this. So if you have one symbol, right, and it has 7 meanings, and times 7, so that's 49, and then you times those by 7. Let's see, 7 times 7 times 7. So, you know, one single symbol based on that philosophy can have 343 different meanings.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it's pretty intense when you start really examining and trying to understand, you know, this stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what we covered here, you know, and this is stuff that interested me when I was going through these texts. And if I encourage everyone out there to go and get some of these books and investigate them and look in them, and you're going to find things that interest yourself, that apply more to you, you know, who you are. And that's the other thing. Based on our knowledge and how we come at a thing, we're all going to perceive a thing in a different way, you know? So these mysteries, you know, they reinforce things. They like bring like hidden things to light, like as you research them, like the epiphanies that you go through when you're researching and putting these symbols together and learning about, like, I can't even begin to relate all the epiphanies that I've had through the process that I've lost simply by going through this information, you know, because you're constantly having this evolution of this process in your mind. And honestly, you know, a friend of mine out in Detroit, he was just saying, you know, he feels like he's having a reawakening. And I was like, man, I hope you feel like that for the rest of your life. You know, that's the idea. You're constantly evolving and coming into these new things and relating, you know, at all points through your life. So, you know, if you're inquisitive and you want to walk down these roads, there's a lot of beauty to behold, you know. And granted, a lot of it may sound dark, but at the same time, it allows you, I think, to see higher forms and have higher understandings of reality in the cosmos, you know.
Well said.
I agree with that. Very well said. And I mean, I guess we'll wrap it up there anyway too, because you're all done storytelling with your book.
I know, right?
Yeah. Story time with Robby
Marx.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Big little graphic.
Yes.
Mythical story time. Tune in.
You need to like read at the kids' library hour or something.
Oh man, that might be in trouble.
Yo, but then a tranny is okay. So
right.
Yeah, right.
Hey, like I've always said, man, I'm not surprised by anything, man.
Yeah, no,
you know, within the turning of it all, if it can happen, it's going to happen. You know, and
That's a good way to say it,
it's like you know, I recently saw you posted up the big guy there in the tub on the subway, where he's in the water and they're getting in the fight. You know. Yeah. So there's that, you know, he's like a bigger black guy, and he's I saw another video where he was snatching a sandwich out of a woman's
Someone
hand.
told me that too recently. I was like, yo, this guy's like an actor for like just stupid stuff.
That's the whole thing, man. He's an actor, you know?
You know, and a couple of people
I think
like
a lot of this stuff that we're seeing, it may be propaganda just to incite, to direct, to you know, force certain energies of certain people in certain directions.
You know, and this is like, you know, some people I don't think quite understood what I was getting at. Well, most people thought I was pointing at the other guy, Stein. I'm like, you know, we already know he's an actor. Like, he's on IMDb. I wasn't getting at him.
Right.
You know, I was getting at the fact that it's like, you know, if you just happen to be scrolling and saw that video of him in the tub, and let's say you're not from a place that has a subway. I'm not exactly sure where that happened, but I'm just quickly assumed New York. It doesn't mean it's from New York.
Me too.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And your impression is going to be that place is screwed up. The only reason you're seeing that is because that guy purposely did that to make you think it.
Yes.
That was not a random mentally ill person. That's somebody who staged that.
But
That
they
is
make
not
it look like
real.
he's a ill person.
It's
Like I said,
not
how did he
real.
even get the blow up pool on the subway
on
car?
the subway. There's a whole crew there doing that.
All those
Right?
kids that are acting like they're all probably shocked, probably all stood around him so he could blow the thing up real quick, and nobody said anything. I mean, come on, you don't know what's going on. You don't know who's in the script now.
Right. It's all impressions, you know?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, and the thing is, it's like, it could be like harmless, funny stuff, but the thing is, people will see that and assume that's like the horrors of everyday subway riding in New York.
Well, and that's back to what I was talking about earlier, I think before we got on, where I was talking about that acting school that a lot of these actors came out of. They, it's not about the acting. It's about the subtle things within the scene, within the complex of the character, not necessarily what they're doing or what's going on, but they teach through subtlety.
The impression that it's leaving on the people that are looking at it. Yeah, it can be serious.
Yeah.
Very well said, Robby. All right, well, that's the end of the Occult Rejects first series. Thank you so much, Robby. That was an amazing series. I couldn't have wanted anybody else to come on and kick it off with me. And thank you very much as well, also, Teresa, for joining.
Thank you.
I do want to add the next series coming up will be me, Synthetic Psyop, and a guest for a 2-part series. And then after that, I will be covering a topic with 2 other people, getting into the chakras. That should be very interesting and fun. I just want to let people know going forward. That's what's coming. There will be another series with a guest. Very interesting. Very interesting. I'd have to say this was up there with like a Robby Marx type of guest. I had a really good time. There'll be 2 parts at least. I had a ball, and I was really happy to be putting this out. But it's not, I just want to let people know it's not going to just always be guests. There will be a topic after that. So we just needed some time to cover the topic and do everything else. Just to let everybody know going forward a little bit what's coming down the pipeline for the Occult Rejects. Robby's stuff is all in the bottom. Robby, do you want to let everybody know again real quick in case they forgot and haven't checked it out yet, where they can find you?
Sure. You can find the Meta Mindcast, METTA Mindcast, all one word, on all the pod servers. And then you can Google RMarxArt, and I'm out there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Teresa, would you like to plug that other amazing podcast you co-host?
Sure, yeah. So we have the Spiritual Gangsters podcast, and that's on all major podcast platforms, YouTube sometimes, although maybe we'll be posting there less. I don't know. It's giving us
Now you're
problems.
getting strikes.
Yeah, it's inevitable. But come check us out, and you can find me on Instagram just under my name at Teresa.Casar.
Very good, very good. Yes, and we have made a BitChute channel too now, for stuff
true.
that we think might be problematic on other platforms.
Yeah.
So you can check out everything there for the most part of it, going forward from now on.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to add, since this is up and live, and I will be leaving it up for a little bit, I just want to remind people, check out the Element server, and we are doing Twin Peaks Watch Party right now. We are working on, we're, I think, going into episode 5 of season 3 this Friday. By the time this comes out, we might almost be done, but just, reminder, Fridays as of right now, Twin Peaks Watch Party. Join Element, check it out, and check out the Watch Party with us. And Helen is telling me to mention, I did make it. I'm just going to be honest, I don't know how well I'll do with it, because it's just like, this is another platform for me to mess around with. I did make a TikTok for the Occult Rejects. I just don't know if I have the patience for it. I've added maybe 30-something people, and I'm just like, I'm done. I'm just gonna
You need to
repost.
hire someone
I'm
for
just
that.
gonna repost stuff I made in Instagram and just organically let it grow. I can't be chasing people and trying to whatever. So if you want to check it out, I'll start adding the TikTok link in there. If you want to check it out, if you don't use Instagram, pretty much the same things I'll post on Instagram, I'll probably be posting on TikTok. So you can check that out instead. And that's it. That's kind of all of any new stuff going forward. Again, thank you very much, Robby, for kicking off this series. It was a great one.
Sure.
I definitely enjoyed it. Thank you again, Teresa, for co-hosting it with me. That is what's up. I had a great time with you, as usual. That is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.